Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for another incredible year with the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about a whole lot of things in the early hobby, the true history, and hold on one sec, we're getting feedback. Let's wait one moment for the ad that's playing at the beginning that they no longer allow us to control to finish. But I'm going to say really quickly that I'm not going to be answering questions in the chat until the very end, because this is going to be about a 45-minute presentation probably. And just gave it to the Detroit Fish Club last night. And here I am home in Seattle, and I'm about ready to give a different version to you guys with a little more tailored information to fish keepers in general, not just angelfish keepers. But we're going to talk about the very first angelfish that was in the hobby. And because of this, this being a slideshow type presentation, as well as me talking and introducing these ideas and history, we're gonna not take questions or comments until the very end. And then if people want to chat, have comments, we can do that. And I'm probably not going to respond to any super chats or anything like that. But I do want you all to know how much I really do appreciate you, and how much I truly understand that this channel couldn't exist. My research into these topics couldn't exist. I just couldn't do this amount of work and spend this amount of time on something I love and share it with you all if it weren't for you guys having the memberships. It's $1.99 in the description if you guys are interested. And also, if you're interested in some of the incredible angelfish that are out there that humans have bred, as well as wild strains that we're constantly finding new body modification versions and color modification lineages out there in pockets in the Amazon and Orinoco and Guyana and Shield. Those are being sold by people like Aquatic Arts, like Dan's Fish, and they also support the channel in a way. So there are links to that in the description. All right, let's get started. Now, if you don't know who I am, of course, I'm Alexander Williamson. I am the creator of the channel FISHTORY, and I have a background in archaeology and history, academically speaking. Also, before you get an archaeology schooling, you need to also take anthropology, so cultural anthropology. And that's what I was interested in for a long time. I spent a good 15 years doing absolutely nothing with any of that other than in my free time. And then, a few years ago, I started the channel as a way to share what I was learning about the hobby and document what I was doing in the hobby. Soon after that, it became clear that I wanted to do this full time if possible, and people seemed to be interested in it. And now we have the channel formerly known as The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium, now called FISHTORY, because I cover a lot of science and other things. But today's presentation, I want to thank someone very special, and someone whom I recommend the work of highly, and that is Dr. Albert Clay, or Clay, as actually how he would pronounce it. So let's say that, Clay. And Albert Clay put together a book called The Toy Fish. Now, this book is about 200 pages, and it has a lot of interesting ads and photos and things like that from all the way back to the 1830s and 40s at the oldest, and all the way up through the 1950s and 60s most recently. Now, I spoke with him. He was 93, I believe, when he passed away in October, unfortunately. And he had a new version. This is the third edition. And there is a edition online that I have access to, and it's not just angelfish, it's all sorts of fish that there are all sorts of documents that now are in the public sphere because essentially 100 years has passed, or enough time, 75 years in other cases, things like that. And copyrights and trademarks are up in a lot of cases. So we now have open access to a lot of the images you're going to see. But he is one of the only people in the hobby to really compile these and publish them for the public. And he even bought the rights to a lot of them back in the day and has given me permission when he was alive to use them in educational presentations. So he just wanted that shared, and I wanted to share with you that he spent his life, the last 30 or 40 years of it. Dr. Klee was a ichthyologist and historian. So really cool guy, and it's too bad he's gone. All right, guys, let's crank up the presentation a little bit, and let's see if we can get this full size on the screen, or at least larger. Let's see here. We'll try to get this as big as we can where I can still switch over to you guys. All right. So we're going to put, I guess we'll put my little picture in the corner, I suppose, huh? So we'll do one of these. So we start off with the beautiful angelfish, of course. Now, I figure you guys probably don't need to see me that much down there in the bottom, but I'm going to stick with you guys just in case. So, this is me live. And again, questions, I'll try to answer at the end. All right. So for those of you keeping timestamps, the talk will begin right at 7 minutes in. And so thank you all. Grab a snack or beverage if you need to still. And we're going to get going on this adventure talking about the early hobby. And we'll start talking a little bit about before what fish keeping was like, before true tropical fish keeping. And now we're going to get into what keeping angelfish and truly tropical fish means for the hobby and for the history of fish keeping. So we have here the Scalara angelfish, and this is a wild variety, very pretty one. We have another one here that has some silver, and this is probably what you would have found all the way up until the 1950s as far as angelfish go. We didn't have actual good color lines of angelfish until 1951 was really the first color line, and that was the black moor angelfish that was a totally melanistic one. Now, before that, there were albino ones here and there, but none of the lines were breeding true until the black moor line came out of Germany. The year after that, the veil tail and the longer fins came out as a stable line. And up into the 1960s, you get the clouded versions. In the 1970s, you get pearl scale like you'd see here. And then you have here a incredible wild specimen from the Manakapuru region. Now, this isn't a redback Manakapuru. This is a speckled Manakapuru, but you can see where the pearl scale trait came from. And that was something that nature actually had a hint of, and then humans ran with. So let's start off this talk. I've acknowledged Dr. Klee, or Dr. Clay, as it's actually pronounced, but it's spelled Klee. This is him here, and I just want to thank him one more time. All right, so early on in fish keeping, angelfish were just not in the cards. So in the 1850s, when Western Europe and Asia and the world in general woke up to fish keeping, there were ponds and there were goldfish being kept for hundreds of years. There were koi being kept for hundreds of years as well, with the goldfish probably being kept really for thousands of years in Asia, possibly bettas being kept for thousands of years, if not, 1,000 years. And this is also true of things like mormyrids in Egypt, eels and catfish in the Mediterranean, and in Egypt and ancient Rome and Greece. We know for a fact that emperors built elaborate fountains so they could sit with their favorite pet eels or big catfish, their Wells catfish, and literally sit in a little pool with them that's tiled with designs of the emperor and the fish. And oftentimes they'd have an albino one or a melanistic one or a Dalmatian one with spots of white and black. And these were high status symbols in the cultures they were in. Likewise, all around the world, fish become a status symbol to cultures that are reliant on fish. Oftentimes, clans, religious groups, and different cultural groups rely on fish for their primary source of protein. And if not their primary source, it's still a source that is found year round, oftentimes. Other than nomadic steppe or Great Plains groups, fish were really the most common source of protein in the human diet, as well as shellfish for a very long time, probably close to 1 million years. And scientists even think that that is what encouraged humans' brains to grow from 500 cubic centimeters to 1,500 cubic centimeters in about 400,000 years, when they hadn't done so in 4,000 years, or sorry, 4 million years of primate evolution. They had capped out right around 500 cubic centimeters. So we have this fascination, this connection with fish. So it's only natural that we want to keep them. And early on, we really kept them in jars and for a temporary amount of time. We had these cabinets of aquariums where you would get these big jars from the pharmacy and repurpose them, or brewing vessels for drinks and things, where you would then fill them with substrate and plants and fish and snails. And they really did believe in a planted whole little ecosystem in the tank, because nature and fish and the ways of the fish were completely unknown. So in the 1950s or in the 1850s, there are expos that go on in Europe. There's the first one at the London Zoo, and then there's a massive one in Paris, followed by a massive one in Berlin and New York, all within several years of each other. And the public really gets to see for the first time big fish like gar and Wells catfish, and schools of hundreds of tench in large tubs and ponds and things, which are native European and native North American fish. And that's mostly what people kept throughout the 1800s and in their ponds previously. Now, goldfish did appear in the late 1500s to early 1600s. We know by 1610 there were some in Europe. 1590 seems like a more likely date of when they arrived from the Portuguese explorers coming from the Spice Island area. Probably a group south of China itself brought goldfish that they had traded for. But that was a cold water tolerant and very ammonia tolerant fish, and they didn't know about ammonia. They did understand the cold water issue, and soon they realized that by the gasping motion of fish, they were trying to breathe, and they understood they were trying to breathe something, and soon they figured out that it was oxygen. So they realized that they needed to put fountains in these tanks if they wanted to keep them for more than a few days. Now, a lot of people throughout the 1800s did just keep fish for a few days. But, these people like myself that are stubborn and want to, keep things around longer and understand how they work and just watch the beauty of these creatures, said, let's try to figure out what it is that they need. And so all these early woodcuts and illustrations from the 1800s, you will see that there's some level of substrate. There are plants that are clearly growing in there. You've got lilies in here. You've got Valsinaria and a bunch of different sage species. And so the plants actually get brought in a good 50 years before the fish. People were keeping lily pad gardens, and at this point in time, it really was a wealthy hobby. Now, goldfish were an exception to that, and all throughout the American colonies, goldfish were reported very early on. Now, the official record says in 1851, the first goldfish arrives in America, according to ship ledgers. However, if you go back and read the journals of Americans all over the Northeast, as early as the 1830s, when they are building and finishing the Erie Canal, people are complaining that the lakes and retention ponds off to the side of the Erie Canal are absolutely inundated with goldfish that people have let go, and that they're getting to large sizes and they're out competing the local fish, and they don't taste good. Uh, so it's very clear that somebody snuck some over at some point in time, but we just don't know who. It's been lost to history. And that's a lot of the fun of figuring this stuff out, why I love researching the history of this, and why questions like who bred the first angelfish open the door to a lot of other information. Now, by the 1860s, we really do see pressurized water, or at least aeration, either waterfalls, pressurized water, moving water, these step systems where they overflow and pour into another tank, and then heating underneath via gas or via some sort of fossil fuel or whale oil. And that is how they heated them, with a slate bottom or ceramic or terracotta bottom. And beyond heating an entire room, which some wealthy people started to do around the 1860s, 1870s, they really didn't have a reason to do that, because there wasn't anything from the tropics that could survive going down around the southern Horn of Africa, or even if it didn't have to go around the Horn of Africa, it had to survive several weeks in the Mediterranean, months in the open sea, had to stop and get water. The old schooners and sailing ships were simply far too slow, even if you brought fresh water, for any fish to survive that journey. And it's not till 1869 that Europe gets its first truly tropical fish, which is actually a subtropical fish, but it's a fish that exists in the tropics as well, and that is the paradise fish. And a French soldier by the name of Guillaume, we don't know anything else about this guy other than his first name was Guillaume, and he was at a Portuguese port of call, and he brought the goldfish back to Paris and then distributed them all the way to Russians and to or the paradise fish he distributed to Russians and to the Germans, the Polish, the Czechs, and the British. Soon after this, by probably the mid 1870s, it appears that they come over to America. And also, what's going on is Europe is constantly shifting. There's wars and there's unease amongst different nation states that don't even exist anymore, and places like the Prussian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. People start to leave. People come to America. And people are coming to America post Civil War America, mind you, because it appears that we are going to be an independent powerhouse. And you get a lot of Germans moving over here. And they're fascinated in keeping these new fish when they've been keeping European fish for, say, 20, 30 years. The ones who were interested in it, and the ichthyologists at the time, which were simply known as naturalists, because you had to study all of nature really in university, and you'd be a biologist or a naturalist, but you wouldn't really have a specialty necessarily that was recognized by a field. You just were that person, and people knew to write you if they wanted to know something about it, until the end of the 1800s. But here we have a stickleback, we have a little mad Tom, and we have a little it looks like a little baby gar, but it could be something like a pike cichlid younging, or a half beak or something too. But soon, by 1876, there's actually a public aquarium, and they're saying, basically, you can tell by the name Coop and Reich that are there at the front of the building. A French guy and a German guy got together and built this thing, as well as New Yorkers. But the first fish club in the country is built as these new tropical fish, paradise fish, gouramis, start entering into the hobby. And what's changing all of this is the advent of the steamship. The steamship can cut the time in 1/5 of what the schooner could do. And later it would become even more so. And then you've got trains becoming common and train tracks laid across continents. And soon people are wanting to see what's out there, you know? The world is becoming connected, and all these European countries and North American countries are having territories in which people are going out and staying in, whether it's, you know, Africa or South America. There's these territories that are taken over during the age of colonialism and imperialism. And the first aquarium really did just keep mostly local stuff. Koi and goldfish, and then paradise fish were a big, you know, exciting part of the opening too. And there were several kinds of the paradise fish, as well as some Medaka rice fish that are kind of long forgotten about. But there are several letters people have written about how charming those little fish were. So at the same time as that is going up, you get in 1877 the first aquarium club in America. And this is the first English print version of it. But you can see again, it's all cold water species. You got eels, catfish, pike, agar, you've got, you know, trout and different bass and things like that in the picture, sunfish, and sunfish and those things are pretty, and they start to bring things in like flagfish and like mollies and platies, and they start reaching further and further and bringing more and more things in as, you know, America's reach extends. But actually for the first 4 years of the meetings of this fish club, they were held in German because it was so many German expatriates that were running things. Now, early aquariums, they start off very ornate and fancy. Yet again, look, you've got substrate, you've got rocks, you've got plants, and usually if you look carefully, you'll see a little snail somewhere. Early aquarists really believed that the snail, the gastropods, that they did something to clean the water. They knew that clams and bivalves did that. So they also brought freshwater clams, bivalves, mussels into the aquarium hobby because they could see them cleaning the water. They could see them reaching and cleaning the water. And they assumed snails did something similar for freshwater. So it's kind of interesting how similar some of these tanks probably would have looked. Now, there's no light on that tank and there's no heater, but that changes very quickly. And you may be asking yourself, okay, so what, they put them in like a wine barrel and ship them off? And the answer was yes. They put them in a barrel or a glass container, and they brought a whole bunch of water change fresh water from the same place where they picked up the fish. And if it were brackish, it usually went bad. Usually things like mosquitoes and things would hatch in there. And so someone on the ship would say, get that out of here, dump it off. And that would be the end of the fresh water for the fish. Unfortunately, you know, the same thing is true of when they're bringing back species of fish to Europe. They see the first angelfish all the way back in the 1830s. You know, 1831 is when the first angelfish is described. 1840, it gets its official taxonomic name, and that's by a German taxonomist and ichthyologist, Haeckel. So the Haeckelidiscus, things like that. You know, you get a lot of things named after these early ichthyologists later in the hobby. But these early keepers would get things in jars and they would be all pale and discolored. And so it just didn't really translate. They knew they were fantastic shapes and interesting, but you know, they couldn't keep them and they just kept dying. So they just kind of, you know, said, whatever. But territorial governors and also rich industry owners, so people who own plantations and, you know, rubber factories and things like that, that were exporting goods from South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia, especially Dutch Indonesia. Early on, the Portuguese in Macau, the British in Hong Kong and Singapore, and Malaysia. You early on see that people locally are interested in these fish, and they're keeping them just like we keep the cold water fish. They start keeping them. So there are some notes from people on how to keep angelfish in a tank when you have the river right there that you can change the water out of. However, how to get that up in America before they even truly understand ammonia and the nitrogen cycle, and they basically worked out aeration, which was lost between the Roman era and actually the late Middle Ages. They still understood it for a time at some monasteries that bred silver carp in Europe, and then of course koi in Japan and China, as well as Korea. Now, I'm just gonna double check that I'm all still rolling on the live broadcast of this. So just one moment. I just want to make sure that nothing's going on where I'm not talking to anybody. All right. So yes, we're still good. I see that we're all still here. Hello, everybody. Like I said at the beginning, I am going to take questions and things at the very end. But there are links in the description to where you can get angelfish to support the channel, Dan's Fish, or Aquatic Arts. And there's also links of stuff that I find interesting and links to be a member or to support the channel. So I just wanted to throw that up there. All right, so back to these fish. We're getting to the angelfish now that you're understanding just what a challenge it would be. So there is a man that moves from Germany very young, in his early 20s. He moves to America in the 1860s, right after the Civil War. And he moves to New York. He talks with these guys who are talking about setting up a fish club, who are keeping native fish, some kind of more wealthy Germans that have become a little more established, the first generation in. And he decides that he needs to make his fortunes out in the Midwest. So he moves to Cincinnati, which is a up and coming city, in the 1870s. It's when America was really spreading out and sprawling, thanks to trains, thanks to telegraphs and things like that. The world was changing, and also photography. So now you've got specimen jars, you've got black and white photography, and even actually silver oxide plates and things where you could see the shimmer of the fish and things. So people are kind of watering at the mouth to get these fish, into Europe and into North America. And Hugo Mulert from Germany settles in Cincinnati, and he uses a dairy milk can that he modifies to carry what he is breeding, which is goldfish and paradise fish. And he's got a little size and a big size. And here you've got the comet goldfish, which he popularized. Arguably, he bred it, but maybe not. And then you've got another popular goldfish from early on. The wolf is its original name, but that didn't stick with it. And they later went with the Japanese original names and things, with Ranchu and well, you guys know goldfish if you care about goldfish. But in any case, you had those veil tails, you had those rounded bodies, you had all sorts of color markings and things in goldfish. So that was kind of keeping people busy while they couldn't keep anything super exotic. But as that's changing, what's also changing is people are starting to keep plants, and they're keeping terrariums, and they have if you have money, if you're of the upper middle class to the upper class in America, a lot of people, it becomes stylish to have a parlor, and you would have plants that like humidity and heat. You might have steam power from your boiler downstairs in your house. And you may have maids or servants taking care of these things, watering them, and you'd have a water feature with some goldfish or a paradise fish, and then mostly you'd have plants and tropical plants, maybe some birds, maybe some parrots, things like that. Those were very popular. And really, the early bird keepers were where fish would first be bought, because there were only a dozen or so fish you could buy. that were small and that were cheap enough for your average person to buy around this period of the 1870s, 1880s. You've got things coming in like mollies, platies, guppies. And, you know, there are still some things like Medaka or like wrestling half beaks that are very early in the hobby. There are notes of them, or things like the blue Galaris and the Corridora peliatus, which actually Darwin writes about on his first trip on the Beagle, not his famous trip, but his first trip on the boat. He goes to Buenos Aires, and in Argentina, they're keeping them in little ponds. And he said, you know, what are these dainty and charming little catfish? And they were actually described by him early on. But this Hugo guy by 1895, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but that's just kind of how history works. You get it in bits and pieces. He's got here prices of Myriophyllum, Cabamba, different kinds of Cabamba. This is the Pontanal version here, Caroliniensis. A lot of Latin names change, but Salvinia, Riccia fluitans, some of the early plants like water hyacinth, Limnocharis, Humboldt, some of the Ludwigias, and then the Sagittarias are what are really big. There are lots of varieties of them, from Windermere, which is where the German Windlauf comes from later, when we're talking about Java ferns and things. So there's an old history to this. And also during this time, the Dutch are becoming obsessed with underwater gardening. And that's where the term in aquascaping comes from, Dutch gardening. So these choice ornamental fish, 25 to 50 cents, and he's selling them mail order, and they would deliver them via courier. You'd pick them up at a train station in any big city. But they've got the Chinese paradise fish, the German goldfair, the German golden tench, the green tench, Brazilian zebrafish, which actually is an acara. And then they also have a falsely labeled Brazilian or South American zebrafish, which is the convict cichlid, that is around at this time. But then they've got newts, frogs, tadpoles, pond snails, sticklebacks, nest building sticklebacks, and it talks about how they're pretty cool, and you can get fish food in boxes already from Mulert here, and waterproof cement. So some of these documents really tell us a lot. These ads, you know, tell us a lot. You send $9 in the mail, you get a tank, you get you know, soil, you get cement for the tank, and you get a little Bunsen burner to heat the tank. It's a pretty crazy deal, even for the time. It's a pretty crazy deal, and he is still in Brooklyn for shipping, but he's out in Cincinnati at this point, if anybody's looking at that and wondering what's up with that. So by this point, 1890s or so, people are keeping guppies, people are keeping platies, mollies, things like that, and they're keeping them in bigger and bigger tanks. And a tank like a 10-gallon or a 20 long are already common sizes. And a 20 long or a windowsill aquarium, yet again, you've got substrate, you've got immersed plants, you've got a clam, you've got a little snail, you've got floating plants, probably Cabamba, Ludwigia, Sagittarius, or maybe hairgrass or something in there, and maybe wisteria or something out here. But you can really kind of gather a lot from these. And, you know, mollies, platies, guppies, in their wild form, they are fetching around 10 for $1, so 10 cents a piece, which today is not that far off from what we would pay for, you know, maybe a cichlid, like a middle of the road cichlid. Back to Muleret's can, he decides that as these fish, and really it changes with swordtails and it changes with those cichlids, they need to stay warm. They can't go down to 50 degrees. There are exceptions in certain fish, but for the most part, they can't go down really cold. And especially by 1895, the Corridora Pelleatus has actually made it. The salt and pepper Cory has already come up to America and over to Europe. In a couple years, you're going to have the zebra Daniel, you're going to have the lamb chop raspborer, the Espy raspborer. You're going to get later on in San Francisco bettas. It's kind of surprising to me that bettas were not brought over earlier, seeing their tolerance to cold. It's not that they love it, it's not that it's good for them, but they can tolerate, cooler temperatures for a time. So I'm a little surprised that they didn't make it to maybe Hawaii and then over. But rice fish do make it to Hawaii, koi make it to Hawaii, and goldfish make it to Hawaii. So over here, the containers that trains and steamer ships would be using, he has different variations, and some combination of all these get used by 1895 when you see that ad. But in the 1870s, 1880s, he's working on it, and he's taking these milk canisters and he's welding in false sides and then putting pressurized air in them to make insulation. He tries foam, he tries clay, he tries sand, he tries all sorts of different things. But he settles on that, and he welds a bike pump for a bicycle tire, and early car tires also you'd hand pump, but he would tie or weld that onto there, and then they would put a thermometer that went through, and then they'd put ice up above a grate if it was summertime, and if it was wintertime, they would put a Bunsen burner down in this air chamber. Or sometimes they just put like a hot brick or something while they're moving. And then these things could sit on a rack that was all fueled by little gas Bunsen burners, like a chemistry lab in school. And they would actually outfit train cars like this. And it was the early fish clubs around the country that first funded some of these things, and just some really crazy rich people who I gotta have that fish. But again, here you can see other versions of it that you could buy. You got a hand pump, you got a little release valve, you got a pressure valve, and then you got a little container to unscrew at the bottom. And that would then have pie-shaped cutouts in it, usually of 2 or 3 layers that you could kind of pull out, and the water would be in there, and have holes on the first top layers, and you'd put your hardier fish at the very bottom, and then you put your fish that need more oxygen at the top. And they kept a PSI of around 250 to 350 PSI, which I think is pretty impressive for the time. Now, these could actually be modularly hooked up in your home aquaria if you lived in the big city of Philadelphia, New York, Chicago. By the 1880s, he's selling systems where you can, this is from a patent, where you can actually plug this stuff in. You can actually have a self water change and a spillway overflow nozzle, and also you can heat it with a radiator or other means. And then you've got kind of like the overflow water, and then the air coming down from down below bubbling up, and the other water going out with the pressure of it causing it to rise in this pressurized chamber. So pretty interesting, in my opinion, but I think it's cool. And another thing that early on had to happen was people breeding these fish had to figure out what is it that is allowing us to breed these fish. And they realized in their home aquarias, when they brought in the substrate, they brought in the leaves, they pulled the father fish essentially early on because they didn't know what to do. They realized that there were little creatures in there. And this man, William P. Seal, figures out the Daphnia, the seed shrimp, the white worms, and all sorts of little food options for fish. And later on, he will figure out infusoria and green water that is needed because some fish are so small that their fry need that in order to survive. So this is very, very key. This man, William P. Seal, being part of the Philadelphia Aquarium Club. Also a name a lot of people are going to recognize, William T. Innes. Not only is he does he have the neon tetras named after him, the blue neon tetra, but he is a man who takes all these early aquarium clubs notes, and he is basically an ichthyologist, the first generation of ichthyologists. When the field gets basically invented and naturalists are teaching them in only a very few schools, these are the people who will later go on to teach ichthyology in the early 1900s, turn of the century, to the students that then go out and become the names we know, Axelrod and things like that. But we do probably recognize the name Innes. Him and his son are very huge fish lovers, his wife as well. And they put together these pamphlets of what people are figuring out. Live bears are pretty self-explanatory on how to breed them, but some of the other fish are more difficult. For instance, the zebra-danio, they're egg scatterers. The Medaka rice fish, that's a little weird how they have the eggs on their belly and then they stick them to stuff and then it takes them a week or two to hatch. So he describes this stuff for people in basically the first booklets you can buy. Now, at this time, right after the aquarium was built in New York, let's take a step back. Herman Rabineau, who has several fish named after him as well, he is the first importer into America that is getting monthly and then weekly later in his career imports to the aquarium store, the first one set up in New York City. And he is importing them not just for the aquarium itself, but for anybody who wants whatever he can get. And he's bringing in things like those cichlids. Soon he's also bringing in other imports from Europe, and Europe and America is kind of trading. America is getting some of the South American cichlids and things like Victorian mouth brooders, things like African butterfly fish, Synodontis. These fish are early in the hobby and they're actually brought over still in the 1800s. And so he is bringing them into America, and really only people in Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Washington, D.C. are going to be keeping those until the 1890s. And then, once you've got enough of these clubs popping up with the goldfish and everything else, this is a fish room from 1894. And you've got gas lighting, you've got shelves with water changes on each level, you've got little 5 gallons up top, 10 gallons and 20 longs below that. You've got breeding pens, you've got pothos growing out of the 40 breeder. It's actually like a 30 breeder, it's a little shorter. And then you've got wood to walk on and dirt below that out in the greenhouse, and electric light. So that is a big advent that's going to change everything as well. So you could order these things, even little decorations and things, by the late 1800s. Sears and Roebuck allows their catalog to kind of democratize the price of some of these aquariums. In the Victorian era, you could get aquariums. They were these big, bulky things where you need to have them special delivered by stagecoach or by a truck, an early truck at the turn of the century. And really, unless you were extremely wealthy, a trust fund kid or something, or a robber baron, a steel industry, person, you're not going to have this stuff. But by the 1890s to 1900, there are more and more options, and these are all under $8 in the Sears catalog, with the $8 one being this up here, and a $2 one being the the goldfish bowl look. And Brooklyn has an aquarium society that's doing quarterly journal letters. By around 1890, that one that was doing annual letters and kind of here and there letters and publishing, they in 1912, January 1912, published an article about infusoria in water. And that's really the last step that we'll need for the angelfish. You could heat them with a gas heater. You could heat them with indirect steam heat or water in pipes like a radiator. But that's it's risky and it's hard to keep things consistent until you get things like the electric radiator, where you don't have to change the heat temperature, or unless you have a very large steam system, like in another building at a university or something, where they have a boiler room where they're making sure it's exactly the right temperature. It's very hard to control that, and one day of adding too much cold to the system and all your fish are dead. So with electricity, you get more consistency with these things, and we now have the knowledge with the little fish, what it is they're eating when they're being bred. There's an excerpt. If you guys want these documents, any members of the channel, I can set up a Dropbox for you guys. But again, very nice looking. And this is a periodical in April. And that same newsletter was such a hit. They sold out and they reprinted it 3 times in New York and New Jersey and Boston, that they then spread it to New York, Brooklyn as the headquarters, and then Chicago and Philadelphia also had prints of it. And it even went all the way out to San Francisco, out to St. Louis, over to Detroit, Milwaukee. It was going all over the US. And at this time, around 1910, is when you first start seeing the true tropical fish farmers attempting to just build ponds in Florida and see what happens. People would summer down in Florida as soon as they built train lines down all the way down into southern Florida. And some of these wealthy folks were fish lovers. They'd see the tropical fish there living in the water. They'd see them in some of the interesting fish that are there, like flagfish and things. And not only do they bring them back, like I said, over time, hit and miss, but things like the beautiful molly and so forth are brought there. And things from South America, from Mexico, the cyclosoma, the green terror, the convict cichlids, and red devils, things like that start getting brought over. The chocolate cichlid, the cyclosoma, is brought over to Florida as early as 1904. There's an account, and it was kind of just rogue individuals doing it early on. But by the time that 1912 or so is running by, you're getting moving pictures, and you get movies where they show a fish in a bowl. They show the aquarium. They show these film reels. The most famous early cinematography, Birth of a Nation, a super racist film about the forming of the Klan, they had an amazing cinematography in that, right? And it really does tell a story of what's going on in pictures for the first time, unlike anything else in history. So here we have another tank you can send away for. Here you can also see there's something like a blue galaris, or maybe even a ram here, but they're definitely not guppies, and they're not mollies or swordtails. It's kind of interesting what's in here. You also can see cypress, or rather papyrus, growing out here, and some different lilies and ferns and fronds. So all of this is getting more and more complex. And also here you can see that they are showing the substrate in some detail. This is a cone where you put the little gas burner that's either plugged into a fuel line, or it's an electric light bulb. And electric light bulbs wasted 97% of their heat early on, so you could use them to heat things. But gas was still more common early on, and so gas was being used well into the 20s and 30s, natural gas, as a source of heat and light as well with the flame. But really, light is another thing we need for infusoria, unless you have just a nice greenhouse or a windowsill. And so with this contraption here, you get a box that can sit under or behind your tank, and it uses electricity to ignite gas. And basically, like a neon sign and I am spacing on the word, but um, not and that's not carburetor. Sorry guys, I'm going to space on the word, but anyways, it is a radiator. Thank you brain, for finally working. A radiator for your fish tank, of hot gas. Nothing could go wrong there. So 1914, just a couple years later, you've got societies popping up all over, and they're doing these cool tours and things where they're actually buying out boats, like steamships that are going across to, say, West Africa. And they'll say, you know what, we will buy out 10 staterooms and we're going to tear down the walls and we're going to put in fresh water tanks and 3 of us are going to go and collect fish, you know? And then they'd pay the natives to go bring them any interesting fish for several months. And on the ships, they would actually have actual aquariums, not just a fish room, but sometimes up to several hundred tanks. And they'd come back on these steamships, but they learned, you know, how to keep them regulated using the boiler on the ship for heat usually and stuff. And so by this point, we have angelfish. 1914, 1915, angelfish are coming into America. 1908, there were angelfish that came to Germany. Over 100 of them showed up and they died within several days of the barrel being opened. They thought maybe it was the air or something. Back then, they were always thinking that something about vapors or the air. But yeah, 1908 is when angelfish hit Germany. So Germans were ahead of America in getting them, but they wouldn't be ahead of America for long in that nobody could breed them. And the first angelfish to come in 1808, then later 1809, 1909, 1910, turn out that they're probably autumn angelfish. And if you've ever tried to breed autumn angelfish, they're a pain in the butt. They're beautiful, but they don't want to breed in captivity. Even today, it's difficult. And, you know, at the same time, people are having really good luck with things like the zebra-danio, the sailfin molly, and all these different mollies, the Amazonian molly, pufferfish, which were called ballfish at the time, and the cichlids. This is a dimorous cichlid of some sort, and, you know, a cyclosoma probably, and then also a convict cichlid. The drawing's a little off, but you get the idea. And here we can see actually the first all electric. So they said, you know what, with Tahui with this gas, an all electric. So there's using light bulbs underneath to heat it. There's sand and substrate. There's plants, and there's reflectors up here with light bulbs. And they're keeping it at 78 degrees, which just seems like a magical number, 76 or 78, depending on who you ask. That's what we seem to keep aquariums at, you know, doesn't it? And here you can see it's half filled. They've got spray bars basically going on in this tank. But this was a DIY setup and photographed and was in some early film reels of a fish enthusiast in Brooklyn. Now, the guy we need to know about to bring this all home, to tie all this together, is this man right here, the man with the blurry face, right? The man with the blurry face, William Pollen. And William Pollen, he is in Pennsylvania, he's in Philly, and this guy, I can't tell if he has a toothpick or he just has like a little dimple or something. I like to think he has a toothpick and he's a BA, you know, or maybe it's a little cigarella. I don't know. Anyways, you know, some Clint Eastwood going on there. But in this picture, that's him when he spawned the first angelfish, 1917. He spawns the first angelfish. He gets a hold of him in 1915. Can't spawn them for 2 years, and boom, he figures it out how to spawn them, and soon there's a frenzy. So just to give you an idea, a Model T's $360, brand new that year. These fish are $220 of fish for the ones with nice markings, $75 for the fish just to get in the country. For a pair, though, it was $200 for an adult pair. For little quarter-size ones coming in the country, caught in the wild as young, those were $75. So a brand new car is $360, and these fish for a pair, it's going to cost you $440 altogether for the pair, and you're going to have to pay shipping. And if they die, there's no insurance. So this becomes a very, very expensive endeavor. And 4 guys, other than Paulin, take off trying to do it. And Paulin is the first to do it. But Frank Locke is another guy out in San Francisco who is responsible for bringing in things like the betta, the zebra Daniel. And he introduced over 130 fish species to the hobby in his lifetime, from the 1870s out west in San Francisco, people that made it big in the gold rush, and later people that came out for the oil boom in LA. He kind of moved up and down California and was one of the first traveling fish salesmen, but he had his home base in San Francisco. So the first guy to import these things into Germany was Wilhelm Emek, and he had fancy fish, and of course he has the Pterophyllum scalara, which by this point the name had changed twice. Heckel no longer gets the credit, and the scalara angelfish is the name that we stuck with. Now, this other one is probably the Altum, and those go for $7.50. So they were actually cheaper because they had a pretty good idea that you weren't going to be able to breed them, even though no one had bred either at this point. But you can also see they've got a puffer in here. I don't know which one that ends up being actually, but one of the African ones. And then there are all sorts of fundulous killifish, little interesting things like that we call today the rocket killifish, the annulus killifish, fundulopanchax, and the different colored chin fish, as well as gambusias, or not gambusias, sorry guys, nothobranchius, the interesting West African ones. Gambusias were very common all the way back in the 1860s. I don't know where my mind was there for a moment, but you know, what's also going on is they're getting good at photographing fish. So you've got people photographing these fish, and really what happened in the time that we skipped over is World War One. And I hate to admit it, but World War One sends people out from Europe, out from America, off into foreign lands, essentially, where they are seeing things they've never seen before. And some people are in America, you know, there's a Spanish-American War. There's people going down to Havana in Cuba when we take that over, and all throughout the Caribbean, you know, people seeing saltwater fish, and that's just a bridge too far early on, honestly. But there's also all sorts of freshwater fish, like little guppies and live bears and things, Amica splendens, things like that coming back. And people are wanting to bring the incredible things they're seeing out in the world back home. Also, what happens is after Germany gets kind of the short end of the stick after World War One, because hey, they started it in the western part of Europe. You know, they end up having to pay really big reparations. It really changes society altogether, and a lot of Germans start leaving for either Africa or for South America, even back then. I know everyone thinks of World War II is when the diaspora of all the loser German military members leaving, but it happened earlier as well, due to different colonial ventures going on and import-export businesses and things. It was kind of a frontier where they thought they could make money, but also you get fish lovers just like we do today in all walks of life, and they want to bring these things back, you know. You can get fish out of Southeast Asia like these zebra danios for $2 a piece. Just to give you an example of this time, you can get the corridoras for $4 a piece, the Peleatus corys from Buenos Aires. These fish are coming a long way, and they're still pretty cheap, even though that's a lot of money back then. Comparatively, it's no $200 of fish, $400 for the pair, $40 for shipping for each fish. That's just crazy. But again, here we've got an Egyptian mouth brooder that's being shown off. And this is early turn of the century photography in these little sliver tanks for specimen containers, essentially, where they will show them off and kind of show all of America what's going on. You get other magazines like National Geographic, Time, and People, and things like that that later come along, and Life magazine, where people are seeing color. Like sometimes it's painted over color, sometimes it's actual color prints, but early on they're getting still, color photos in these magazines, and it's blowing people away, what it is they're seeing. And the thumbnail is one of those early colorized photos of some Scalara angelfish that actually William Pollan had, that he had a National Geographic come and check out. But we talked about all those gas units. Well, what happens here is the Zoological Supply House in Rasburg, Maryland, comes up with a heater that's finally all electric. It's all contained. It's not going to shock you as easily. And this is in the 19 teens. And this is, like we said, the missing part were the lights and the heat. You had to put them in windowsills, so you got algae a lot. And while that created infusoria inadvertently and also kept the ammonia down with the plants and with the algae, this is also when they finally discovered ammonia, specifically the thing that fouls the water usually, and that you need to cycle it, and that goes on. And, things like antibiotics didn't even exist at that time, early on back then. And it's right around this time that people are starting to study that and understand that. And it's not until the late 19 teens and early 20s that pH is even a thing brought up in the aquarium hobby. So it turns out that whatever Pollan's secret trick to breeding the angelfish was, they think it was probably peat moss and infusoria, as well as keeping the tank up at like 84, 85 degrees. But again, you've got rare tropical fish, another ad from the era. Here you can see they're bringing in all sorts of interesting, there's gobies, there's more Egyptian mouth brooders, there's the West African fish, and there's also little mollies. There's snakeheads are brought in and are very popular. But everybody kind of specializes in different stuff. And by 1924, which we're going to jump back one more time, but we're almost done, folks, the electrozoan air pump comes out, and you can buy it for $40. It'll run 25 tanks, and it only takes up 15 inches by 8 inches. And it is a little belt driven piston pump that can bring air stones to your tanks for up to 25. So at this point, it shows that there is a real desire for fish rooms. It's becoming a fad. And now at this point, koi and goldfish have become democratized. They're not just for rich people, they're parlors of the wealthy. And even before that, royalty and emperors and things. But now they're everyday middle-class Americans, GIs coming back from the war. They get their kids a goldfish or a parakeet down the street at the pet store. And likewise, the people who get a little more into it are now dreaming of things like angelfish, like truly tropical fish, neon tetras, cories, cichlids, epistogrammas, things like that start, calling the hobby. This is another setup showing a patent, but again, Sears Roebuck magazine, 1920s. You got the pump setup, you got a radiator for some heat, so you got an air pump, and then you've got a circulating water pump for the heat, or you could have plugged that electric thing in. And at this time, they're also using light bulbs for heat as well. So there's lots of options out there. And on a budget, you can just set up 2 light bulbs. So if you had electricity at your house, set up 2 light bulbs like this in between 3 tanks, and that would keep the tanks warm enough in a house as long as the house stayed over around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And then also they would build these reflecting chambers with the lights, and they started playing with things like silver oxide lights and different things to try to replicate the look of limelight, which was a really pure white light made with quicklime that was burned early on in theater. They played with, neon lights and containing things in glass tubules. And soon those things, and some of them good, some of them bad, some of them radioactive, start entering the market, and there's more and more options. But, as these angelfish have now been bred, by 1921, a guy named Franklin Barrett breeds the next set of scalar angelfish in America. It's not till 1926 that the next guy does in Chicago. And then after that, finally, the Germans get some breeding over there. But really, it took till the 20s. So that William Pollan guy was getting $17 a fish for his little fish because everyone wanted tank bred fish. And while it did bring the price down from several hundred for a pair, where he was charging 50 for a pair, it was still pricey to try to breed them for a number of years, for about a decade afterwards, although they did disseminate quickly. But here, this is your quintessential heater. So just like today, it's a heater where you've got the glass coil of the heater ready to hold, basically, or a metal coil in a glass tube, and that heats up and all of a sudden it gets hot, so there's sand or clay around it. And they invent that in 1933. This one on the far side, it gets patented, and this one has a little dial on the top, and then it plugs in, no surge protector. But guess what? Technology basically doesn't change ever again with heating tanks, and now we still have the same crappy heaters that overheat and explode and cook your fish or whatever, yada yada. You guys have probably seen my video on Aquarion's heater that literally works the same way as something almost 100 years old now, 90 years old now. So also air pumps get smaller and cheaper, and they're all electrical now. You don't need steam or anything. This is the first, I think it was like $12. You could get it by 1926 in Sears and Roebuck, and you could run 2 or 3 tanks with this in a splitter. By the 30s, the angelfish is iconic of what is possible in the hobby. You are not a true fish connoisseur if you don't keep angelfish, and you're not a true ichthyologist or expert unless you know the secret of breeding them and switching over to beef heart when they get to a certain size, and feeding them white worms or micro worms when they're one size, and green water out of a dropper, and sterilizing it with methylene blue. And you take the eggs and you put them in methylene blue and put a magnetic stirrer bar. There's so many different old wives' tales and things of how you're supposed to do things in the hobby, and this lives on today, right, with how we prefer to keep things and all the options and all the newfangled stuff that's always coming out in the hobby. So this is essentially when they become cheap enough that your average American could pay the equivalent of about 30 or 40 bucks today and get them. So your average American can have them. And really, World War II is the next stage that changes everything in the fish hobby. And after World War II, we have another round of young men going off to unfortunately die and fight a war, but also to go see incredible places. Color film comes back of these places. Outposts are made there. Different political connections and alliances are made, and different goods are coming from all over, and different fish are being found all over. And so they come back, and not only do they have the steamship, but by the late 50s, they have the airliners, and those can get things in a matter of a day or two. So even more fragile fish can make it in easier conditions than outfitting an entire rail car or an entire 10 bedrooms of an ocean liner to try to get something accomplished. Becomes much more affordable. But what was interesting about the early hobby is that clubs like the San Francisco Bay Club were actually set up. They just celebrated their 100-year anniversary, but they actually were set up and they started selling brine shrimp early on out of the bay because that's what they fed their fish, but that's what funded the club to go out and pay for expeditions that Frank Locke's company in San Francisco was importing fish from. So they'd team up with local clubs, with universities, with ichthyologists, and they'd all work together to bring in these fish. And one region would get a fish and it'd be really exciting. And then, it would kind of spread from there. So that is the talk. Look at it go, cycling through the history of what we talked about. And back to my favorite fish, which is the wild fish that kind of exhibits all the best things other than bright orange, I suppose. And I know there is blue in these, that humans have been able to breed into one. And yet we still are finding new varieties out in the wild. And now you can get them ever cheaper. But that is the story of the first angelfish bred in captivity in America, and subsequently the ones after that. And so I hope you guys enjoyed it. That is my story, and I'm sticking to it. If we have any questions or anything, I am happy to answer them if I can. Also, I see a gifted membership from Kayla. StreamYard is terrible at telling me what went down while I was yammering on and on and on. For those timestamp lovers out there, you can say 7 minutes in to an hour and 10 minutes in is the talk. But this is similar to the talk that I gave the Detroit Club. And if I could ask you guys if you enjoyed it, if you like this kind of content, it really does take me years to research to be fluent enough to tell the story like this. And then also to be able to source things and have the rights to show them on YouTube without someone copyright infringing me. And if you enjoy it, I don't ask even that you be a member. That does really help. So thank you, super chats, members, all that stuff. But just share this with somebody. Like it, enjoy it. Come back and drop a comment. I'd love to see this, even though it's a live stream, get a little traction because, I'm proud of it. I'll say that. I'm proud of it. I don't say that a lot about things, I guess, but I really enjoyed this also. And I think it's kind of what ideally I want this channel to be about. I wanted to finish the year on this. And also, probably tomorrow, I will be streaming the conflict episode, talking about what is going on, pollution, industry, trade, tariffs, that's going to impact the fish hobby, that's going to cause fish to become extinct, endangered, natural threats, climate threats, things like that. So I do that every year, but we're going to be talking about what's going on in 2024 that we need to worry about, wars that could be started in regions where we get fish, things like that. But yes, so I'm looking at the chat now, and Aquatic Moose is definitely going to subscribe now. I would love to come down under and come do a talk or come check everything out. I don't know what the fish game on Steam is. I'm so dumb about Steam that I don't know if that's a literal game that people are playing, or if you're saying if people need to up their game on Steam streaming fish content. I don't know. I'm dumb. I'm a big dummy about other platforms like TikTok or Telegram. No, that's not a thing. What's the other one? WhatsApp. That's not a social media. Okay, never mind, guys. I really don't know what I'm talking about on anything other than YouTube, and that's a stretch. Jose Torres, thank you so much for the super sticker. And then MNC Aquatics, thank you for becoming a member. Thanks, Jeff Kane, for letting me know, buddy. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, I tried to pack a lot of info in there. There's a lot of researching documents like ship manifests and things like the goldfish thing, where you read journals from people that were aquarists or not even aquarists, and you have to find things like Google tools that allow you to look through massive scanned copies of text. But then you find things like, okay, it says if you Google it that the first goldfish came in like 1850 or something. So why are there goldfish 50 years earlier than that being complained about in dozens of people's like journals that are just like farmers and stuff, keeping track of their crops? Uh, yeah. So let's see here. Um, Fishberg, thank you very much. Amara, you are so welcome. All you guys are welcome. Thank you for being here, joining me. I really do appreciate it. Let's see here. Oh, thank you, HB or KBH. I really appreciate that. Um, the missus does not have dinner ready, and that's okay. She had a long day at work. I'm probably the one bugging her. Silver Creeks, what's up? How's it going? Jose Torres again. Holy cow. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot of fish things here. Uh, yeah. Yeah, this would make an awesome podcast too, I guess, huh? Thanks, John. It's good to see you, buddy. And Lillian, peace. I guess I should maybe set up a Twitch. I don't know anything about it. I'm gonna need someone under 30 to tell me about these things, or a really nerdy like 40-year-old or whatever. But yeah, thank you. And Linda, thank you so much for the super sticker. I really do appreciate that. Uh, yeah, I do. Yeah, and I've been doing research for a number of weeks on several things, and I haven't done any short episodes lately because of this kind of thing. I've got a couple talks ready that I like to go travel and talk, and also do talks over Zoom or Skype or whatever they have set up at their club. Um, but yeah, Scarlet Gobies. I don't know Scarlet Gobies. I'm not sure which ones those would be. Jamie, thank you as well. Andy, Featherfin Films. Twitch has a lot of ads. Okay, that's interesting. I kind of don't like all the like scrolling media. It's just so ADD, and I want people just to enjoy enjoy me. Give me the attention. Don't give the little banner the attention. No, I'm just kidding. But it does annoy me, the like crazy flashing, and like when people donate, like bells and whistles go off and like things pop down. And I know that's like supposed to give you guys a dopamine release or whatever, but I think we're all adults here, and like if you want to support me, you watch the channel, you support me, you're a member, whatever. All I ask of anyone is to watch. If you really, really enjoy it and you got $1.99, become a member. Anything above that is so far above and beyond. It just, I can't believe that you guys do that, and it allows me to do this full time now, and I can do things like this. So yeah. um all right, guys. Okay, let's see here. Valley, wait, where'd it go? Valley says, I recommend playing Fish Game if you would like to get triggered about fish keeping. It's a 3D game made by Smarter Every Day. Almost everything about it is practically incorrect, but it's fun, I guess. Interesting. Smarter Every Day. That dude usually, does his research. I'm gonna have to get a hold of him and be like, "Hey, I'm a channel. I need to be your continuity director. You need to hire me to redo this." You guys spam him. That's my message for you all. Go spam. What's his name again? Smarter Everyday Guy. Don't spam him. He's such a nice guy. It seems like. Um, Yes, and I'm wishing everybody who's here, if you're not going to be here tomorrow for the stream, a healthy and happy new year. But I just have to do my stream always. Uh, Nancy B, hello. Here's a banner for attention. There we go. We got it. Thank you. Uh, AVNJ tested it out pre-release. No one ever reaches out to me. I'm not gonna put a pity party on myself, but I've been around 7 years, and it's probably the low budget and the missing teeth and looking crazy and saying really ridiculous things. But yeah, definitely, I feel like I'm not in the loop with the YouTube crew, other than the crazy ones, and I say that in a loving way, like Lucas Bretts and Father Fish, and all of us crazy folk. Um, Thank you so much, Gloria. Holy cow, that is mind blowing. You like my haircut? Thank you. My wife made me get it. Yeah, thank you. I really do appreciate all y'all here, and do not feel obligated, like I said, to to donate super chats, but it is appreciated. And the case on holy cow, 5 free memberships, that I really do appreciate too, because it lets people see the 200 free episodes that are in the community tab that are audio friendly. When do I think people first cultivated fish for agriculture? I've given several talks on that, but I will make an entire video on that for you, because it is one of my favorite topics as an archaeologist and historian. Yeah. Fishberg, thank you for pitching me as a speaker. I've been speaking, when I do it online, I've been doing it for free, just giving the money back to the clubs, just to kind of get the exposure, to show people, hey guys, guess what? I don't have one subject. I have like 100 subjects that I'm happy to talk about for an hour. Don't let me talk, about whatever I want. I keep going down to Portland and giving different talks every time I go. It's like 5 now. Yeah. What was the first fish that was kept in a bowl? Well, probably goldfish, or koi, some early carp, and then but it's hard to say. Probably little local minnows were kept that way by many people too. Um, hey, Emerald Hills, Neil Veritas, hello. Have you ever seen any of those aquariums marked in the old ads still in the hobby? Yes, I definitely have. People don't tend to get away or give away a cast iron aquarium stand or frame that weighs like 800 pounds. It's just something that a rich person had, and they're not going to give away, unless it gets melted down by like, a blacksmith or something, or repurposed as like furniture or something. They tend to stick around, actually. There's a lot of those early tanks still around. The more ornate, the more likely it's to be around. The tanks that are really getting hard to find are the ones from the 50s and 40s with the slate bottoms and the metal sides and stuff, kind of the Euroframe style. They can also shock you too, so that's a hassle, to say the least. And it looks like somebody did another. Oh, my wife is complaining that she has a tin full of candy from Christmas that she didn't know about. How do you cure multiple tank syndrome? I think I have it pretty bad after watching you and Father Fish. Well, I don't know how to cure it. Start a channel and make sure you always get a spouse that will keep you in check. Get a spouse that hates fish. It's the only way you can keep it under 30 tanks. Yes, again, Dr. Clay will be very, very missed. This book, I paid $200 for it 7 years ago, but it's very limited print. He would give them out free, and he told me, "Oh, I'll send you one for free if you hadn't bought it already." By the time I got introduced to him, I kind of had to prove my salt of knowing fish history and stuff before anybody would introduce me to him or Rosario Lacorte or any of those guys that are like the OG, real deal ichthyologists and fish keepers. That the legends. Kalish, thank you so much. Yeah, that's the gift that I was like, where did it come from? What, it doesn't say. It just says one gift. So I wasn't sure if that was an error. But thank you so much, Kalish. You guys, I think I'm going to wrap this up. Otherwise, people are going to look at this live stream and be like, he talked about angelfish for 2 hours. But I will be back tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, if you could share this with anybody you think could find it interesting, any clubs, anything, let them know. And thank you so incredibly much for letting me do what I do in the last year, the last 7 years, whatever you've been here for. I'm just blown away that, it's working out. So have a wonderful night. Take care of your critters, your fish, those around you. And of course, take care of yourself, or you can't do any of that. So I will see you guys tomorrow, and have a good night. Tomorrow's the depressing episode about all the reasons why the fish are disappearing. The reason why 32% of freshwater fish are now threatened with extinction. Danikin, I hope you're getting better, man. I was exposed to the vid at our Christmas party also. Haven't gotten it yet. Hopefully I won't. But somebody had it, and now my uncle has it, and now, like, my cousin had it, and then my other cousin has it, and now my uncle has it. Yes. And so my wife and I are still knocking on wood, but we were hanging out with everyone that night. But I hope you're getting better, brother. Member for 38 months. Look at that. Nobody can claim longer. Kenny has been there since I was able to have members, since members were a thing. For me, anyways. My channel was allowed to have them. All right, you guys. Thank you so much. Take care and have a good night.